I was 6 years old, sitting on our duneside porch with my grandmother, when I first heard the words Emerald Lighthouse. Storm clouds were bruising the horizon, turning the late summer afternoon into a violet dusk, and the gulls wheeled inland. Gran pointed her whittling knife at the far edge of the Atlantic. On nights when the moon turns coin-thin, she said, you can see a green beam sweep the water. That's the Emerald Lighthouse. It wakes bridges only trees can walk. Forests our trees could walk anywhere, let alone across the ocean. She tapped the warm pine boards between us with her knuckles. Forests migrate, child. They've always migrated. They just do it too slowly for most folks to notice. The emerald light hurries them along. My parents laughed later, calling it another of Gran's salt-cured tall tales. But the image of trees stretching their roots like legs across leagues of water found a permanent birth in my mind. 20 years later, when satellite photos started showing ghostly green streaks blooming overnight across mid-Atlantic current streaks no biologist could explain, I packed my notebooks and came home. I was a climate field researcher by then, specializing in plant adaptation rates. The data were grim. Rising temperatures outpacing seed dispersal, species marooned on shrinking islands of suitable habitat. Talk of assisted migration filled conference halls, but everything moved too slowly, entangled in policy and funding. While committees argued, mountain-top spruce groves browned to skeletons. So I took leave, drove the coast road back to Cape Meridian, and climbed the porch steps of my childhood. Gran sat in the same rocker, hair gone silver snow in place of its old charcoal. She lifted her eyes and smiled, as though she'd been waiting only for me. You felt the tug, didn't you? She asked, pushing a cup of nettle tea into my hand. The forests are on the move again. I told her about the satellite streaks. She nodded, unsurprised. Then she pressed a folded mariner's chart into my palm. Someone had drawn an ink-green line from our cape to a blank patch of ocean 200 nautical miles east. Grandad and I sailed there once, she said, voice low. We saw the beam with our own eyes. 'Twasn't a lighthouse built of brick or steel, more like a tower of living crystal, greener than any jewel. Soon as we approached, it vanished, like fog burned off by dawn. I've thought of it every night since. The next morning we set out in Gran's weather-stained sloop, the Moonwort, named for the fern said to unlock any door. I handled the mainsheet while she held the helm steady. She'd insisted on coming, though she was past 80. Place remembers old blood, she said. Might not open for strangers. 3 days into open sea, the winds died, leaving us in a pane of dimpled glass. I woke at midnight to an otherworldly hush. No slap of wave, no creak of mast. Gran stood at the bow, eyes narrowed. Wait for it, she whispered. I followed her gaze and felt my pulse stumble. A slender green blade of light slashed the darkness from some unseen point ahead, sweeping left to right in slow arcs. The beam did not scatter as it travelled. It kept a spear-straight edge, illuminating nothing until it touched the water. Wherever it met the surface, blossoms of emerald fire rippled, fading as soon as the beam passed. Gran's smile crinkled her face. There she is. I grabbed binocular. Through the lenses, I saw a spire faintly luminous, as if chiselled from luminous jade, standing alone on the horizon. It didn't cast reflections like glass or metal, but glowed from within, organisms pulsing through vein-like channels. No wonder satellites never spotted it. The thing looked less constructed than grown out of the sea itself. Wind returned in a single breath. The sails filled, and the Moonwort glided toward the spire. My professional brain scribbled hypotheses. Bioluminescent coral tower? Volcanic glass riddled with phytoplankton? Yet instinct said this was older than coral reefs, older even than tectonic plates. An hour before dawn, the beam contracted, thinning to a thread before winking out. The spire faded to a dull silhouette. We dropped anchor 1/2 mile off and waited. Waves lapped, gulls cried, but the tower kept its secrets. A fog sneaked in with sunrise, curls of jade mist weaving around the sloop. It smelled like moss after rain, so vibrant I tasted chlorophyll on my tongue. Visibility shrank to arm's length, yet the anchor chain tightened, as though some current had seized it from below and begun to tow us. The deck tilted. Gran gripped the rail unfazed. "Hold steady, it's bringing us inside." Inside what? The fog parted, and there was the tower, looming overhead. Not stone, not correlates. Surface was leaf over leaf, thousands of translucent emerald leaves overlapping. They rustled, though no breeze touched them. Roots as thick as ship masts twisted down its sides and vanished beneath the water. A gap opened in the foliage, revealing a tunnel lit by a soft green glow. The sea flowed inward like a river into a cavern. Without sails or motor, Moonward slid forward, guided by unseen pull. Gran touched my sleeve. "From here," she said, "we walk." We lowered a dinghy, rowed through the opening, and entered a vast chamber whose walls curved upward beyond sight. The water inside was shallow, clarion clear, its bottom densely carpeted with tiny luminescent spores that tickled my oars. We beached on a platform formed by braided roots. Above us, steps spiraled through the living tower. Climbing, we passed layers of botanical wonders, orchids emitting sound like chimes, vines that curled politely out of the way when approached, bark etched with slow-moving patterns, as though the tree itself dreamed into its flesh. Some of these species I could name. Most defied classifications. Each level felt like a rung on a ladder built for worlds, not humans. At last we reached a chamber encased in crystalline bark. In its centre, a lens grown from interlaced leaves rested upon a cradle of vines. It framed the horizon like the beveled glass of an ordinary lighthouse lamp, but no oil or electronics powered it. Instead, a cluster of pale seeds hovered inside, spinning silently. The closer they spun, the brighter an inner emerald flame grew. So many questions coiled inside me I could hardly breathe. What was this place? Who tended it? How long had it steered forests across hemispheres? Gran bowed, surprising me. "Keeper," she said softly. Her voice carried like dew down the roots. The seeds condensed, fusing into a humanoid figure no larger than a child, half sapling, half spectre. Its eyes were unopened buds. Its limbs were thin shoots bound with fibres of light. When it spoke, the inside of my own chest vibrated. "Your line returns," it said, voice like wind in reeds. "Time ripens. Will you bear the mantle?" Gran's hands shook. "I am moss on fallen trunks, Keeper. My seasons dwindle." The figure drifted closer. "The beam must cross wide waters tonight. Boreal woods seek refuge southward. Tropical canopies journey poleward. Without passage, they perish, and in their dying the animal cities fall with them." "But the path is lost," Gran whispered. "Storms cut the skeins. Even the ferns forget." The keeper turned, surveying me. "Blood of the line, mind of the new sciences. Will you see what must be seen?" I didn't know what line they referenced, or why I suddenly felt sap rising in my arteries instead of blood. But I nodded. The roots beneath us flexed, forming a circular balcony. Gran and I stood side by side. The leafy walls peeled apart, revealing an unbroken view of the sea in all directions. Up here, morning devoured the last stars. The keeper lifted its twig arm. The cradle sank, aligning the living lens with the horizon. I braced for a flash, but first came sound, a deep chord like the resonant underside of a cello, vibrating the tower, my bones, the very air. Then the emerald beam erupted, broad, luminous, spearing westward over the Atlantic. I saw what the satellites had only hinted. Wherever the beam touched water, stems thrust upward, unrolling into leaves the size of sails. Interlaced canopies interlocked, weaving a floating bridge of living foliage. It wasn't static. The plants sprang forward, grew, died, and regrew at astonishing speed, a self-maintaining treadway. This was how forests moved. not as individual trees, but as braided communities riding living highways. The beam was both call and catalyst, coaxing dormant seeds in seawater to sprout instant infrastructure. When a continental forest reached the opposite shore, the highway withered, surrendering itself to the deep currents, leaving no trace except drifting petals. The keeper's voice skimmed my mind. 2 centuries ago, we lost a flanking tower. Storms severed its root heart. Since then, crossings crack. Tonight, unless the line holds, the northern forests will drown. What must we do? I asked. It extended its fingers. 2 seeds, faintly golden rather than green, floated toward us. Anchors, it explained. One to plant at the bridge's birth, the other at its landing. They bind the path, mend what storms sunder. Gran reached out, but her hand wavered. Age weighed heavy. Let me, I said, surprising both of us. Gran studied me, then nodded once. Go. I'll keep the beam steady. Roots wove themselves into a sleek coracle, cupping me like a walnut shell. The forward rail unfurled into a mast of living bamboo. A sail grew from woven ferns already catching invisible wind. I nestled the first anchor seed in a pouch. As I descended the tower's outer skin, the coracle slid directly onto the bridge. The living leaves formed a gentle concave gorge, holding a channel of quicksilver water for vessels like mine. Beneath, I glimpsed fathoms of blue, dotted by silhouettes, fish, whales, even porpoises threading the rootwork. The journey was both voyage and metamorphosis. Every mile I sailed, the bridge refreshed ahead, folding itself outward, while behind me it curled back into the sea. The coracle timed its drift with this perpetual bloom. My senses sharpened. I distinguished the subtle dialects in the rustle of oak versus maple leaves overhead. I tasted trace minerals in sea spray and knew which tree species would crave them. By afternoon, I sighted the eastward edge of the Gulf Stream. There, the bridge faltered, as if bruised. Gaps yawned where vines had not yet knotted. Plumes of salt spray leapt through wounds in the green fabric. I ordered myself not to look down at those blue abysses, but my gaze betrayed me. Shattered rafters of dead wood floated among the waves trees that had attempted the crossing without a finished path. I placed the first seed where rupture began. The moment it touched foliage, golden light radiated in fractal veins. The bridge steadied, gaps knitting closed. I felt it in my chest, like a second heartbeat. Night approached, violet and quick. The moon emerged, coin-thin, just as Gran had promised all those years ago. Under her glint I sailed on. Stars unrolled above me, familiar constellations, yet reimagined as leaves and seeds. I wished Gran could see from the tower. She can, a thought replied, but whether it was my own or the keeper's, I couldn't tell. Near dawn, the air changed. Colder, fragrant, with pile far ahead, black shapes bulked the horizon, a continental forest massing along the coast of Nova Scotia, trembling as though impatient. The bridge tapered toward them, but flagged near its end. I sailed across newly formed segments that quivered, half-formed, then slackened like exhausted arms. Salt foam hissed through every crack. I retrieved the second seed. My hands shook, not from fear, but from latent energy coursing through limbs and breath. I recognized it. Sap cell, the tower's lifeblood lent to me. Climbing to the coracle's rim, I set the seed into a crumbling lattice of roots. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. Still nothing. Panic rose. Maybe I'd missed some ritual word? The forest ahead moaned, a sound like a glacier calving. Thousands of trunks bending under wind and desperation. If the bridge failed now, that whole ecosystem might be stranded on warming shores, doomed. I closed my eyes and listened to the languages of leaves I'd learned on the voyage. The hush of maple, the clack of spruce, the wide-mouthed sigh of willow. Then I spoke back, not in English but in Russell. A prayer of belonging. The sound was clumsy yet true. The seed flared. Golden light surged along the root timbers, reaching land in a heartbeat. the final segment of the bridge fused, glowing amber before settling into emerald calm. I felt a rush, as though the forest's spirits applauded, and the forests began to move. It was not the cartoonish march of trunk-legged behemoths I'd pictured in childhood. Instead, saplings rose from the ground, roots loosening enough to skate over soil. Elder trees bent, letting younger ones climb their backs. Mosses streamed like capes. The entire woodland flowed onto the bridge, crown above crown, a multi-layered river of green. Animals rode within, squirrels clutching acorn caches, birds nested among moving boughs. Insects clung to bark. Even bears ambled under arching branches, bewildered yet trusting. When the first wave reached me, the trees parted to let the curricle pass alongside. I drifted parallel to the procession. A sugar maple dipped its crown, brushing my shoulder. Tiny whirls of pollen swirled around me like confetti. I laughed, tears blurring the spectacle. Hours later, after the last hemlock stepped onto the highway, I turned Moonwurt's surrogate bow back toward the tower. Behind me, the forest convexed across the horizon, a portable continent sailing under its own canopy. The return was easier. The living road unfurled beneath silent stars. As sunrise bled pink, I saw the emerald lighthouse ahead, its beam dimming now that the passage was secured. Gran waited at the railing. When I set foot on the tower's platform, she embraced me with surprising strength. "You've done what none of us could," she said. "We did it together," I replied. Yet even as I spoke, I saw how the night's vigil had taxed her. Her shoulders drooped, eyes ringed in charcoal shadows. The keeper appeared. "Root and crown," it said. "Addressing Gran, your watch concludes." Gran exhaled, relieved and sorrowful at once. "I have borne many seasons. Now let the young vines twist skyward." She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I hesitated. My career, my lab, the world of human metrics tugged behind me like ballast. Yet the memory of those migrating forests overshadowed everything. The improbable grace, the urgency. I answered the silent query by kneeling. The keeper opened a slender palm. Inside lay a new seed, neither emerald nor gold, but white, streaked with ribbons of every spectrum. "Anchor no path," it said. "Shape them, for crossings ahead will grow longer, storms harsher. You must chart new routes." Gran placed her hand over mine, sealing the seed between generations. Her warmth was fading, yet her gaze blazed with life. "Guide them well," she whispered. Later, as we sailed Moonwort homeward, the tower slipped beneath the sea behind us. Camouflage resumed until need summoned it again. Gran remained below deck, resting. I spread nautical charts on the cabin table, marking current shifts, projected hotspots, corridors where rainforests might seek higher latitudes. But the work would not be limited to paper. Already in my veins pulsed the tower's chlorophyll breath. I could sense the leaning of distant tree lines, the thirst of root nets, the pressure of carbon building in their stomata. The forests spoke, and at last I spoke back fluently. The world had entered a new epoch, one not of human dominion but of shared pilgrimage. Oceans would sprout temporary canopies. Deserts would birth night-blooming relay stations. Mountain passes would host leaf-lit tunnels. People would call these phenomena miracles or myths, but I knew their truth. We were all migrants on a fragile sphere, ferried by living bridges dreamed into light by an ancient tower of leaves and the steady hands of those who listened. So long as even one heart answered the call, the emerald lighthouse would rise, generation after generation, turning moonless nights into green dawns until every forest found safe harbor in an ever-changing world.